All right, welcome. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the science of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. But here's the thing. This explainer isn't just for people with a diagnosis. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of how our brains focus, how they pay attention, and why they get distracted. And along the way, we're going to uncover some really powerful science-backed tools that can help pretty much anyone sharpen their concentration in a world that feels like it's designed to break it.
So here's what we've got on tap. First up, we're going to figure out what ADHD really is and go way beyond the stereotypes. Then, we'll journey inside the brain to check out the super important role of a chemical called dopamine. After that, we'll take a really honest, balanced look at the medications people use, then explore how what you eat can actually change your focus. And finally, we'll wrap up with some amazing behavioral tricks for literally rewiring your own brain for attention. Okay, let's jump right into part one. We usually think we know what ADHD is, right? We picture some kid bouncing off the walls. But the real story is so much more nuanced and, frankly, a lot more fascinating than that. You know, our understanding of this has been evolving for a long, long time. It first popped up in medical books way back in 1904, just as attention deficit disorder. It actually took until the mid-1980s for them to add the H for hyperactivity, because they realized that for a lot of people, the physical restlessness was a huge part of the picture. And now, fast forward to today, it's everywhere. We're talking 1 in 10 kids and a huge wave of adults getting diagnosed. And it really makes you wonder, right? Is our modern notification pinging world basically giving all of us ADHDs-like symptoms? So when we talk about the classic signs, these are the big ones. Everyone knows about the trouble holding attention and the impulsivity, but the others are just as important. A lot of folks with ADHD have what's called time blindness. They just can't feel time passing, which is why deadlines can be a nightmare. Then there's the famous pile system for organization. You know, it's not about being lazy, it's just that for this kind of brain, out of sight is literally out of mind. Piles keep things visible, but, it's not exactly efficient. And a really big one is a weak working memory. Think of it like a faulty mental sticky note. The kind you use to remember a phone number just long enough to dial it. When that's not working well, it's almost impossible to follow a bunch of instructions or even remember how a sentence started. Okay, and this right here? This is the central paradox of ADHD, and it's so important to understand. We call it an attention deficit disorder, but that's not really accurate. It's the wrong way to think about it. Because the very same person who can't pay attention in a meeting for 10 minutes can also have this unbelievable laser-like hyperfocus on something they love, a video game, a passion project, anything. They can get so locked in that hours just vanish. And that really gets to the core of it. The brain's hardware for intense, deep focus is absolutely there. It works perfectly. The issue isn't a lack of ability. It's a problem with turning it on and pointing it in the right direction. It's kind of like having this incredible Ferrari engine, but the ignition is shot. You can't reliably get it to start for the boring stuff, like driving to the grocery store. But when it does fire up for something exciting, wow, it goes faster than anything. So the real question is, why is that ignition so picky? So to figure out that why, we've got to pop the hood and look at the brain's wiring. Let's move on and meet the key chemical that's basically the conductor for our entire mental orchestra. Okay, so you can think of your brain as having 2 main modes of operation. You've got the default mode network. This is your brain on idle. It's what's running when you're just chilling out, daydreaming, thinking about the past. Then you have your task networks. These fire up when you're trying to get something done, when you're zeroed in on a goal, like listening to this right now. And normally, these 2 networks work like a seesaw. When one goes up, the other goes down. Simple as that. You can't be deep in a daydream and deeply focused at the same time. And here's the absolute game changer in understanding ADHD. In the ADHD brain, that seesaw is broken. Instead of one going up while the other goes down, they're often both firing at the same time. It's like you're trying to tune into your favorite music station on the radio, but a loud talk radio station keeps bleeding through on the same frequency. You just get this jumbled mess of noise. And that's exactly what it feels like inside, this constant mental static that makes it incredibly hard to focus on just one thing. So what's supposed to be in charge of all this? What keeps that seesaw balanced and the radio station separate? Meet dopamine. Dopamine is this amazing chemical called a neuromodulator. It's not just a simple on-off switch. It's more like the conductor of your brain's orchestra. It's dopamine's job to point its baton at the task networks and say, okay, you're up, while at the same time turning to the default mode network and saying, you guys be quiet for a bit. It makes sure everyone plays their part at the right time. And all of this leads us right to the main theory here, which is called the low dopamine hypothesis of ADHD. The idea is that the root of the problem is just not having enough of this conductor, or that the conductor's signals aren't getting through properly. And without that clear direction, all the sections of the orchestra just start playing at once, creating that internal chaos we call ADHD. Okay, so once you grasp that dopamine piece, everything else starts to click into place, especially when we talk about the most common treatments. So now let's take a really balanced, clear-eyed look at the pharmaceutical toolkit that's designed to fix this dopamine problem. So you've probably heard of these: Ritalin, Adderall, modafinil. These are the big ones. And even though they have different names, they all do basically the same thing. They work to crank up the levels of available dopamine and another related chemical, norepinephrine, which is all about alertness. Essentially, these drugs give the brain's conductor a megaphone, allowing it to finally get the orchestra organized and playing in sync. Now, we have to be really clear and upfront about what these things are. They're controlled stimulants. And chemically, something like Adderall is, well, it's amphetamine. This isn't to scare anyone, but to be scientifically accurate. These are pharmaceutical-grade versions of compounds that are, kissing cousins to street drugs. The really big differences are the purity, the super precise dosage, and the delivery mechanism, which is designed to be slow and steady, not a big, dangerous rush. And that, of course, brings up the huge, obvious question: why in the world would you give a stimulant to a kid who's already hyperactive? It sounds insane. But the source for this explainer actually asked a pediatric neurologist this exact question, and the answer is pretty profound. Giving the stimulant actually helps those focus circuits in the brain finally come online. And the key is doing it during childhood, when the brain is still super plastic, still wiring itself. The goal isn't just to get through the school day. The idea is to give the kid's brain a chance to actually feel what focus is, to build those mental muscles while the brain is still super moldable, hopefully for life. Look, we can't talk about this without talking about how widespread their use and misuse has become. The scale is staggering. Some studies show that as many as 35% of people between 17 and 30 have used a drug like Adderall without a prescription, just to study or get work done. This has gone way beyond ADHD. It shines a huge spotlight on the intense pressure we all feel to constantly perform at our peak. But medication is not the whole story, not even close. There are other powerful levers we can pull, things that create a much better foundation for our brains to work properly. So let's move on and talk about the huge role of diet and supplementation. Okay, before we get into the specifics, there's a really important idea we need to get straight: mediation versus modulation. Some things mediate a process. That means they directly cause it. Adderall mediates focus. It goes in and forces dopamine levels up. But other things modulate a process. They just influence it. They nudge it in the right direction. Your diet doesn't force you to focus, but it modulates your ability to focus by giving your brain all the right building blocks and keeping things running smoothly. So what actually works according to the science? Well, the biggest one, the one you hear over and over from neurologists, is getting rid of simple sugars. The constant spikes and crashes in blood sugar just destroy cognitive function for anybody, but it's especially tough on a brain that's already struggling to regulate itself. Then there's something called an oligoantigenic diet, which is basically a process of elimination to see if a hidden food sensitivity is making things worse. And on the supplement side of things, omega-3 fatty acids and a compound called phosphatidylserine have both been shown to be really positive modulators for a brain's focus systems. And if you're thinking about supplements, the research actually gives us some pretty specific numbers to aim for. For omega-3s, you're looking for over 1,000 milligrams of EPA a day, and this is crucial for focus. Over 300 milligrams of DHA. DHA is literally one of the main things your brain is built out of. And for phosphatidylserine, the studies that saw real benefits used a dose of 200 milligrams per day. All right, so we've hit the brain chemistry, the pills, the food. Now let's get to the final piece of the puzzle, and maybe the most empowering one: how we can actually train our brains to be better at paying attention without needing to buy or ingest anything at all. To get this next part, we need to talk about this wild thing our brains do called the attentional blink. Imagine you're doing a Where's Waldo puzzle. You're scanning the page, looking, and then boom, you spot him. In that tiny moment of aha, your brain actually goes blind for a split second. It's so busy processing that it found Waldo, it can't see anything else. So if Waldo's dog was right next to him, you'd probably miss it completely. Your brain literally blinks. So this leads to this amazing shift in thinking. What if ADHD isn't a problem of not focusing enough? What if it's a problem of focusing too hard on one little thing after another, causing a constant stream of these attentional blinks? It would explain everything. It would explain the hyperfocus, you're locking on so tight, and it would explain the distractibility, you're constantly blinking and missing the next important thing. So the big question is, how do we stop blinking so much? Well, research gives us two incredible, totally free tools. First up, practice something called panoramic vision. Instead of looking at the world through a little soda straw, you intentionally relax your eyes and just take in the whole room, the walls, the ceiling, everything in your peripheral vision. It pulls you out of that intense Waldo-finding mode. The second tool is even simpler, and get this, studies have shown that sitting quietly for just 17 minutes with your eyes closed and just paying attention to what's going on inside your body, your breathing, your heartbeat, doing this just once can create a permanent reduction in your attentional blinks.
Okay, let's finally tackle that H in ADHD, the hyperactivity, because this is where it gets really cool. This quote comes from a neuroscientist who is explaining a trick that brain surgeons use. A surgeon has to be perfectly still for hours on end, right? So when they feel their hands start to shake, they'll start tapping their foot under the table. It seems totally backward, but what it does is it gives an outlet to all this background move energy that the brain is constantly generating. It channels that energy to the foot, which lets the hands become rock steady. And that just flips our whole understanding of fidgeting on its head, right? For a brain that has a lot of that background move energy, like many ADHD brains do, all that leg shaking and pen clicking isn't a sign of not paying attention. It's a subconscious strategy. It's the brain giving that restless energy something simple to do so that the rest of the mind can focus on the important task. It's not a distraction at all. It's a tool for focus. So, as we bring this all together, let's leave with one last big idea. We've gone through the chemistry, the neurology, the pills, the behaviors, and it all points to something bigger. Maybe the secret to mastering our own focus isn't about brute force, about wrestling our minds into silence. What if instead it's about learning to be a better conductor for our own brain's orchestra? Knowing when to call on the strings for focus, when to let the brass section wander and be creative, and even knowing how to use a little foot-tapping percussion to keep the whole performance steady.